I thought for tonight I'd talk a little bit about why we should care about St. Thomas Aquinas, right? We're talking about somebody who lived 800 years ago, and he was born in 1225, so that's pretty close to 800 years. And he dies in 1274, so he lives till he's about 49 years old. So it sounds like some of you know a little bit about St. Thomas Aquinas, or you've heard of him at least. Who knows something about him that they could share? Yeah, Will.
So he died while by hitting his head on a branch while going toward the meeting with the Pope. That's what I remember.
Yeah, exactly. And then he's taken to a Cistercian monastery where he lives the last period of his life. And he gives up writing at the end of his life, notably. While he's convalescing in this monastery. And his secretary was very worried about this because he was so productive. Of course, he wrote many, many books throughout his whole life. It's a little over 8 million words now that they're all digitalized. That he wrote overall. But eventually he got tired of his secretary pestering him and gave him the explanation that compared to what he had seen, now everything that he had written was merely straw to him. So it was... So he seems to have had some spiritual experience in his prayer, and he gave up writing at that point. Yeah. Does anybody else know something about him before we get started? Yeah, Rachel.
Wasn't he bullied when he went to school, and his peers called him something like the big ox or something?
Yeah, the dumb ox. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And his teacher, who was also a famous intellectual theologian, replied when he heard this that the roar of this dumb ox was going to shake the world. So not everybody thought that, but yeah, because he was very slow and deliberate. He wasn't somebody who spoke hastily. And there's stories. There's one story about him in the classroom that the students would like to tease him because he was so overly sincere. And so one day, one of the other friars said, "Oh, look, there's a pig flying out in the field," pointing out the window of the friary. And Aquinas, his eyes widened, and he rushed to the window to look out, to the delight of all of his friar friends who were teasing him and laughing at him. And one of the fellows said, "Well, why would you go do that? Put yourself there to be, doing something so foolish to be bullied." And his reply was, he thought it was more believable that a pig should fly than that a friar would lie. So he has a certain logic to his way of approaching things. Yeah, great. So we do know a little bit about him, and that's there were three things I thought I'd talk about tonight. The first is why does the Church care about St. Thomas? Why does she propose him to us to study and as a model of holiness? And then I thought I'd say a little bit about my own experience. Why is it that I came to care and love St. Thomas? And then lastly, a little more open-ended perhaps, but to propose to you some reasons why you should care about St. Thomas. Why would he be relevant to us today and to people at your stage of life today? So why does the Church care? Well, we know, of course, St. Thomas has this reputation for being a great intellectual. He wrote many books. His most famous book, the Summa Theologica, or Summary of Theology, is 5 very thick volumes. It comes to about 3,500 pages, so that's a pretty long. My son reads some fantasy novels that get pretty close, series that get pretty close to that. He likes Brandon Sanderson, and So some of his books get up to about 1,000 pages a piece, and you start adding them up, yeah, they get there. But this is, again, very careful reasoning and argumentation. So it's a little bit of a different thing. But the church proposes St. Thomas to us, of course, as a saint. So to see that, we need to know a little bit about his life, and that's helpful, perhaps more helpful as a model, if we take that those dying words that everything I've written is merely straw. Perhaps the life is maybe the more important thing to be aware of. When he was very young, about 8 years old, he entered the Benedictine monastery to study at a school. His parents were from a noble family in Italy, so they took him there, and they had, in keeping with the custom of the time, because they were nobility, they had hoped and expected, somewhat reasonably, that eventually Thomas would become the abbot, the head of that monastery. And in the Middle Ages, that meant that he would have to control over the property that the monastery owned. He'd be an influential figure and in a position to help his family. But as he becomes an adult, he meets people from a new religious order, the Dominicans. And the Dominicans were an order of wandering preachers. So they had no monasteries. They didn't stay in one place. They wandered and begged and preached. They were like street corner evangelists, if you like. And so his noble family didn't like this idea very much. They would have rather he stay in the monastery, become a leader there, and be a person of influence rather than a wandering beggar. And so much so that, in fact, while he's on his way to the Dominican house to study, his brother brings soldiers and takes him captive, and he's held prisoner in his family's castle for 2 years, where he's held there so that he won't run off and take vows with the Dominicans. And during this time, his family tried different means to convince him to change his mind. His mother sends his sister, who he was very close to try to talk sense into him, make him be a little more realistic, they thought. But by the time they finished their discussions, she surprises her parents by deciding to enter the convent. Her brother Thomas convinced her to become a nun. His brother, however, takes a little bit more of a lot more of a devious approach, and hires a prostitute to go and visit Thomas in the room where he is held, and thinking that if he gives in to temptation in this way, that would cure him of these sort of youthful ideals. But he chases her out of the room instead, and so eventually, after 2 years, his mother has pity on him and lets him leave. The Dominicans quickly send him to Germany, so he'll be far away from his family in Italy at first to study. He goes there and studies with St. Albert the Great, who was sort of one of the great leading theologians of the day. And as we said, we mentioned some of his experience as a student with others, being made fun of, and his response to that, and really his intellectual project that he forms, really in partnership with St. Albert, is to integrate the works of the ancient Greek philosopher many centuries later, Aristotle, with Christianity. And Aristotle was becoming important at this time because they're starting to establish universities throughout Europe, in Italy, in Paris, and Oxford. All those great ancient universities were being founded. And one of the things with Aristotle, as he's beginning to be translated now into Latin, is if you're looking for a university curriculum, Aristotle has a book about everything. So if you want a curriculum, you have a one-stop shop in a way. And so a lot of the works of Aristotle became the foundation of his teaching about how do we this person without any reference to Christianity at all, because it was before Christ and he had no knowledge of the Old Testament, those books that existed earlier. How do we integrate that within a Christian vision? And that's what Aristotle, St. Albert take up. In a way, a similar question to what Christians face today. How do we integrate the best of our scientific knowledge with our understanding of our faith? So that's the sort of question that he was wrestling with in his own day, and wrote many works, many commentaries on the Bible, his great Summa, and commentaries on other thinkers as well. And the church proposes Thomas then to us as a guide for our intellectual life, particularly both at the early on at the opening of the 20th century, the last 100 years. That began with an encyclical by Leo XIII in the late 19th century on Christian philosophy, and he proposes St. Thomas as the what he calls the common doctor of the church, the one who is common to all of us. And he does that because he thinks that with the writings of St. Thomas, we have a model of how to engage with the problems of the modern world, particularly problems facing humanity at the time. And as well, at the end of the 20th century, John Paul II writes an encyclical on faith and reason, where he again proposes St. Thomas as being a model for us. He refers to him as the doctor of humanity. So that's, from the perspective of the church, there is a kind of consistent pointing out to St. Thomas's thought as a model for us. This became very important in the late 19th, early 20th century. There's about the middle of the 20th century, there's an important council where all of the bishops come together, Vatican II. I think you've probably heard of this a little bit. It changed the liturgy or provided options for the liturgy to be said in our own language rather than only in Latin, and various other things. And it's sometimes said, well, at this point, St. Thomas fell out of favor. And to some extent, what happened was there was an opening up. Other people began to be studied as well as St. Thomas. But even in the documents of the council, St. Thomas is the only theologian who's proposed by name as somebody that ought to be studied in the text on Catholic education. So there's this consistent message throughout the church and throughout the popes to go to St. Thomas for his wisdom. So why should I care about this, or how did I come to care about this? I mean, I wrote a PhD thesis on St. Thomas Aquinas and published articles about him and this sort of thing, but that could just be to pay the bills, but it isn't. When I was younger, I actually started off life as an atheist, and so I converted to Catholicism through my studies. It was really when I finished my undergraduate degree and started my graduate school, preparing to do a doctoral degree, that I learned about St. Thomas and began reading what he had to say. And through reading his writings and writings of others, St. Augustine and many others, became convinced of the truth that the church teaches. So there's certainly a personal aspect to that as well. As an atheist, I was looking for some sort of truth. I didn't really know where to find it, but I wasn't satisfied with other intellectuals who are trying to say, well, you can't really know anything, or people who would argue that well, whatever you think is fine for you, but for me, it's something different, a kind of relativism. I was trying to get a hold of something that seemed to be true. And so what is it in Aquinas that helped me particularly is what philosophers would call his realism, that he looks at everything from the point of view of existence or of being. Whereas most of our modern philosophers, outside of the context of the church, most secular philosophers begin with the will, our choice, our desire is the principle. So it's not that reality is there and that we have to listen to what it teaches us, but rather it's what we want that matters, and we shape reality to our own ends or to our own desires. And so what I found in St. Thomas was an answer to this view that was all around me in school and what I was reading, and the other philosophers that I was reading had this view, Nietzsche and many other famous philosophers, that what matters is your will. This is the first principle of all things, and you then have to impose your will and shape reality to it, was their message. And what St. Thomas said was the other way around. No, if you want to know the way things are, you have to listen to them. You have to observe carefully. You have to pay attention to what they're saying to you. And so this focus on reality or being as the basic principle of all things, I found very compelling as an alternative to the kind of slogan that knowledge is power. St. Thomas rather turns this on its head in advance by saying, no, knowledge follows the reality of things. Knowledge follows the being of things. You have to know the way things are first. So too with our ethics, right? If we want to know how it is that we are going to live well, what actions are going to fulfill us and make us happy, well, we have to understand what kind of creature we are. What is it to be a human being, a man or a woman? And then from that, we can see, well, what are we ordered towards? What goals should we be pursuing in view of the type of creature that we are? Then it's rooted in not just in what I happen to desire, which sometimes leads me to fulfillment, other times leads me to disaster, right? If or even just discomfort, right? When we had great meals over Christmas, this is one of the common things. I really love the turkey dinner, but after the third or fourth helping, I start to tire of it, and I don't want to see turkey again for many weeks, right? So, and any of the goods of the world are like this, you'll notice, right? If you love playing video games, well, you play enough video games, eventually you get tired of them. You get bored, right, of the one that you're playing. Any sort of earthly good is like this. We want it, we pursue it, we get it. But if we get too much of it, we get sick of it. We don't want it anymore. So in any case, it is these kinds of considerations that I found Aquinas a compelling answer to a lot of the problems that I was trying to figure out at that point, and not finding good answers elsewhere amongst the other philosophers and the other fellow students I was studying with. So the last point I wanted to say a little bit about, because I didn't want to keep you too long tonight, is really, why should you care about St. Thomas Aquinas? Well, maybe you've heard some things already that might lead you to think that, and he writes about lots of things. So it's one could choose a wide range of subjects. But I thought I'd just take one line that he writes and reflect on it with you a little bit, because I think it's particularly relevant for our time, and particularly, I think, in important ways relevant for young people. And he writes this talking about the sin of what we call today the sin of sloth, His term for it in Latin is assidia. And what he means by this sloth is really a kind of spiritual thing. It's not just laziness, although it could be that too. But it's particularly the sadness that we might feel that leads us to give up on spiritual things. So getting sad because of the effort that something spiritual takes. So I don't want to go to Mass on Sunday because I'll have to get out of bed. I won't be able to watch TV, etc. Right? I don't want to do my prayer because I have other things, to do that are pressing upon me. That sort of view. And in this context, he has a beautiful line, I think. He says that men and women cannot live without delight, without joy. So if spiritual delight is lacking, we will necessarily turn to carnal ones, right? So we see, if we look around us, and we see various problems in our culture of people turning to things like drugs or alcohol or promiscuous sexuality, etc. Even just filling our time with television and video games, right? As much as good as those may be in their proper place, but in excess. Why are we doing that? Well, here St. Thomas suggests we're doing that because we don't have spiritual joy in our life, right? If we have spiritual joy, if we take delight in things that are spiritual in our prayer, then we won't need to go looking elsewhere, right, for this consolation. So with this, one way of thinking about it, if we I like to make a distinction here between what we might call entertainment and what philosophers historically have called leisure. With entertainment or relaxation, I'm engaging in activities to help me rest, right? So it's an activity that has a purpose, right? All of these things, that we might do, as we say, television, video games, playing sports, etc. All of that is good. It helps us rest, relax, so that we can return to our labor, to our work, to our study, to our responsibilities refreshed, right? Nobody can just work all of the time. Even St. Thomas, who's producing quite a lot of writing and working quite a lot. So we need that rest. But this is, for a purpose, and it's can be done in excess, right? If I'm engaging in those activities of rest or entertainment beyond what I need to return to my responsibilities, then it gets excessive. Leisure, on the other hand, are those activities that are not just done for another purpose. They're not something that I do the way I do my job to earn a paycheck, or the way I rest in order to return to my job, right? This would be, a sad sort of state of life. People sometimes say they're working for the weekend. Well, this is, completely irrational. You're going to work 5 days so that you can take 2 off and do what you want. Well, the math doesn't add up, right? It's not very logical. If that's all there is work so that I can rest, but rest so I can go back to work, well, there's no meaning to this, right? Ultimately, these things have to be ordered to something else. And these other goals are goals that I pursue for their own sake. I pursue them because they're good in and of themselves, right? If we spend time in prayer, right? If I ask you, why are you praying? I mean, you might have an answer, right? You might be praying to win the lottery. Well, I pray to win the lottery, but ultimately, prayer of adoring God, of giving thanks to God, these are things that are good for their own sake. To try to contemplate and understand God and creation more deeply is something that's desirable. It's good for its own sake. Or if we go to an art gallery and experience works of beauty. Again, why are we doing that? Well, we're not doing it to earn a paycheck, and some people may be, right, if they're writing a review in the paper. But in and of itself, the art exists so that we can behold its beauty, be moved by it. So these sorts of things we desire for their own sake, and these are items of leisure, right? And because because they're desirable for their own sake, they're very closely connected to living a fulfilling life, right? If I'm spending time with my family, with people that I love, again, this isn't for an instrumental purpose. I'm not using them as a tool to my own ends. Rather, I'm trying to enjoy them for their own sake. And so to fill our lives with these activities, right, that are desirable for their own sake, and to see the other things in my life, those things that are purely instruments or tools, my work, my recreation, etc. These things are all instrumental, they're important, they have their place, but they're important precisely because they serve something greater. They serve that which is desirable for its own sake, those things that can truly and authentically fulfill us, those things that are worthy to be loved. So I think that, there's something in there that, it strikes me as being deeply relevant for us today. And so I just would, close by asking St. Thomas's intercession for each of you in your studies, your projects, your friendships for this year, which is a very unusual and difficult one. So thank you for your attention, and nobody asked questions as I was going along, so hopefully you have some now.
Well, something that I was, when I was in university, I loved was his proofs of God's existence. And when you said that you were an atheist, I was very curious to know, was that something that you thought was interesting? Did that spark you as an atheist, or was that something that where you're like, eh? Does my question make sense? Not very intelligent.
Yeah. No. Yeah. He has 5 proofs for the existence of God. So yeah, it's quite interesting. I think particularly his first argument from motion was very compelling to me. And I kind of came to St. Thomas because I started with Augustine, and I spent about a year. I kind of put on hold my studies and read Augustine, various works by St. Augustine for about a year. And that kind of convinced me that God existed. But I had a hard time seeing how this was the God of Christianity. Because sometimes Augustine can write, he writes in a beautiful way, but he can, because he's influenced by certain philosophers, he sometimes talks about God as this being that's so transcendent that it doesn't have very much, it sometimes sounds as if it doesn't have much to do with the world. And as an abstract principle, I kind of accepted the existence of God. And what St. Thomas helped me do was to see how this God Augustine was describing was the God of Christianity, not just a God that brought everything into existence and left it there, but a God that answered prayer, that moved me from inside, and yet still was transcendent every bit as much as Augustine thought.
Thank you so much. Yeah, wow, I like that comparison of Augustine and Aquinas. Mm-hmm. All right, so we have some questions here. Let's. So Noah asked, "What is the name of his commentaries on the Bible? I recently received the whole." Oh, Noah. Which is a collection of Bible commentaries that St. Thomas put together, but they aren't his own.
Yeah. Well, he writes a lot of commentaries on the Bible. So there's the Catena Aurea, which means golden chain, is a particular type of commentary. It covers the Gospels, so the 4 Gospels. And what he does there is, for each verse, he pulls out passages from the fathers of the church, the writers from the first centuries of Christianity. And he pulls out the ones that he thinks are most relevant, that he had access to. And so when you read through it, you get his selection of passages from the early church fathers about those accounts in the gospel. His other commentaries on scripture, he doesn't have commentaries on the whole Bible. but quite a lot of it. There's a commentary on St. Matthew. There's a commentary on St. John. And these are line by line commentaries. So he starts off by dividing up the text and saying, what are the different purposes the gospel writer is trying to achieve in this particular section. And then he'll go through each line and comment on particular words or particular passages. So he has commentaries like that on Matthew and John, and then on all of the letters of St. Paul, including Hebrews, which, these days commentators would say that's not written by St. Paul, but, it's in the same Pauline grouping, if you like. Then in terms of the Old Testament, you're going to test me here. I won't know all of them, but the ones that come to mind are, there's a long commentary on the Psalms. There's a commentary on the book of Job, the prophet Isaiah, and I'm missing a few, but you won't find them in English. So I could look them up, but those are the ones that come to mind off the top of my head.
Well, Noah's learning Latin, so maybe you can do it. Yeah. Maybe you could do it, Noah.
There's a nice database with everything Aquinas wrote in Latin online, so you can find that if you want practice.
Sweet. All right, next question. What rank of nobility was his family?
Oh, good question. I don't know off the top of my head because I'm not a historian, so my sense is a sort of middle ranking. They weren't, they certainly weren't monarchs, so they were local. Their authority would be local. I forgot the Italian terms for that, but my apologies. I'd have to look it up.
Guillaume says thank you, also known as Will. All right. The next question was, how does his title, Doctor of the Church, give his writings more stature for people, especially maybe converts like yourself?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Well, what are doctors of the church? Right? I mean, they're those people whose writing and thought has so profoundly shaped Christian understanding that the church proposes their thought to us as a sure guide, as something that we can trust in. In St. Thomas's case, it's interesting because particularly with this title, Common Doctor, there's this notion that Leo the 13th suggests that the other doctors of the church and the fathers of the church provide us with deep insights into a variety of particular areas, and what St. Thomas does is gather them together into a coherent whole that's cohesive and fits together. So it's not just showing particular truths here and there; it's showing how they organically fit together in a way that then can assimilate any new truths that are discovered and root out others. So Leo the 13th compares St. Thomas to a river, and he says, well, just like and he says, well, all these other writers, doctors, fathers of the church make great contributions, and he compares them to rivulets or streams that flow into the river. And what St. Thomas is kind of like the river that gathers all the streams together into this sort of mighty torrential flow. So that's sort of, I think, the way, or that's what at least strikes me about it as helpful, is that with St. Thomas, what we find is a framework to approach new truths confidently and to approach intellectual disagreements from a point of view that is open and honest. Right. And so in St. Thomas, for example, in his Summa, every question he poses, he begins with objections. He begins by giving the arguments of everybody who disagrees with him. And only then does he look to authority and start developing his own position. So usually he'll list all these arguments against what he really thinks is true, and then he'll propose some authority from the Bible or from a church father that throws into doubt the objections. And so this creates a puzzle, right? And he, as he says, philosophy and theology begins in wonder, right? And it begins in wonder because we have different convictions that both seem to us to be true, but we don't understand how they fit together. And that's what the philosopher or theologian does, is show how they fit together. Did I answer your question? I hope so.
That was Justine. I think it did. Yes. All right. So the next question: do you have a personal favorite quote from Aquinas, or a favorite work?
Gosh, yeah. Well, the favorite quote that I like is not from something he wrote, but it's something that his biographer says that he said. It's in Latin, it's non nisi te domine. And he tells us this was done after he wrote the treatise on the Eucharist. He brought his writing to the chapel and set it on the altar and was praying in front of the altar. And his biographer says that during this prayer, he went into the chapel and saw him in levitating above the ground in front of the altar, and both he and Thomas heard the words, "You have written well of me, Thomas. What do you ask as your reward?" And St. Thomas's answer, not realizing his secretary was there, was this line: "Nothing but you, Lord." Non nisi te domine. So I quite like that particular line of St. Thomas's. It's a good aspiration for the purpose of when I'm studying. For instance, I might read, every time I finish a paragraph, I may just say that to myself to remind myself why I'm doing this. To make that act of study a time of prayer, for example.
I love that. If I missed a question, please just pipe up. You guys can also take your mics off put your mics on if you wish to ask. I had a question. So I know this is on, we have a little 10-minute chat board, and I know that this is actually on the board since we've been speaking so much about the fact that he wrote a lot in Latin. Do you have an opinion in regards to the role the language Latin plays within our church, or Aquinas' opinion on the role Latin plays in our church?
Sure. I'm not aware of him having a particular opinion on that, because it was the language of academic work of the time. I don't recall there being any particular discussion of it in what I've read there. In terms of the church, it's so Latin's the language of the official language of the church. So its documents and the theology and teaching were originally developed in Latin. So it's helpful, particularly for those who want to understand the teaching of the church at the level of experts, to be able to grapple with that in its own right, because sometimes it's hard to translate concepts, right? As I gave the example of sloth. Well, when I talk to you about sloth, probably sadness that arises at spiritual things is not the first thing that comes to most of our minds when we hear that word. So knowing the original language is helpful in those sorts of things. But really that's more a matter for experts than for most of us. So in terms of that, I think it provides a way for us to have a common understanding and transmit that understanding over generations, whereas ordinary languages like English change over time, right? as we know, they take on new connotations, and words the meaning of words evolves, right? So, I can think of, I'm trying to think of examples. I'm only thinking of older ones now. It reveals my age, but I remember in particular, my children saying something is sick and meaning it's good, or something is fat, and somehow this means that it's appealing in some way or other, I think, but I don't quite understand that one. But again, those are a little bit older. Some of these children are adults now, so I'm not sure, but I'm sure you have current examples you could give me of words that take on new meanings over time, which, if we're trying to express a truth that is part of a tradition and informs us over many generations, it's helpful to have a terminology and a language to express that in, that's suited to those realities.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So the last question is, what do you think St. Thomas would tell the Catholic youth of today? I know this is a hard one, hey? Yeah. A little bit of creativity here.
Yeah. Well, I can't resurrect him. Somebody else has to do that. So I suppose, my best answer, I guess, is what would I say in light of the various things that I studied, which would be, I suppose, his main message is, take your life seriously, right? And God's calling for your life seriously, and pray about it deeply, right? I think that example from his life that we were talking about of being locked up in a castle by his parents, because of his vocation, right? Because he was, he had reflected on his call from God. He didn't just go along with where his parents had put him, but he was, conversing with God in his prayer about that, and was resolute once he saw what God's will was for him. I think that's a perennially relevant, example for us, not just to go with the flow of whatever's happening around us, and also makes him very relatable, right? If your parents don't understand you, St. Thomas is your man, right? If you don't get along with your brothers and sisters, here is a model of a saint who went through that, probably in a way, hopefully none of you will have to experience, right? Again, others, there's other horrible things we can experience, but being locked up for 2 years is a pretty big one.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So Adam, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. I was just wondering, how old were you, when you were kind of fully converted to the Catholic faith, when you started going to mass and stuff? How old were you?
Let's see. Well, I was baptized when I was 26, and about a year and a half before that was when I was starting to, became intellectually convinced of Catholicism, and I went through sort of an RCA program and started going to mass pretty much daily at that point in life, though I couldn't receive communion yet. Was actually, it's a funny story. I had, because I'd been reading all of this stuff about Augustine and Aquinas, and then for some reason or other, it occurred to me reading the Confessions over and over that Augustine was a bishop and had this life of prayer, and I knew nothing about these things. It was all intellectual to me at that point. And so I asked a friend who was studying in the same program as I, who was Catholic, if I could go with him to mass sometime. And we went together, and I was quite struck, because I'd never experienced that kind of liturgical prayer before, or really prayer of any sort. And I was really struck by the consecration of the Eucharist and seeing people receive communion. that was very moving. And so the next weekend, I looked up the parish that was in my neighborhood and walked over on my own. And during the Mass, there was this priest who came out, and there was just he just came out to distribute communion. He wasn't saying Mass or anything, just to help. And there's something about the way he walked and sang; it just radiated a certain kind of joy. And then as I was leaving, he was in the lobby shaking hands, and I happened to be walking past. So he shook my hand, and out of my mouth, without any previous planning, came the words, could I talk to you sometime about joining the church? And to which he gave me this remarkable answer I'll never forget, which is, the forms are over there. Which was a very Catholic answer, I learned later. But of course, he thought I meant, how do I register for the parish and get envelopes to get tax receipts or something? But I guess he saw the look of bewilderment on my face, and he asked, "Oh, do you mean becoming Catholic?" And I said, "Yes, that's more what I had in mind." So he said a bit of a prayer, and then we started to talk and whatnot. But yeah.
Yes, thank you. The testimony is very powerful, and it brings us hope. I just wanted to mention, Jeremy said, with COVID, we have been locked up for a year, so one more year to go to understand St. Thomas. Yeah,
that's great.
That's Jeremy for you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
Jeremy?
I think I pulled a bad joke.
Yes, you are our bad joke man. But in a way, they're good jokes. We appreciate them. Yes. Yeah. Justin's like, yeah. So my last question is, can you tell us a little bit about Newman? And just like what, I guess, who does Newman serve in regards to the type of students you have at Newman, that kind of thing?
Sure. We have a lot of things going on. So it's hard to sum up. Basically, our mission is to educate people for the service of the church, particularly in Western Canada. So that's our overall aim. And so we provide the intellectual formation for seminarians, those who are going to be priests. They live in St. Joseph's Seminary, and all of the priests who would live with them as formators in St. Joseph's Seminary are faculty members, professors at the college as well. So that's one key thing. And then also lay people who want to do professional forms of ministry would take those same programs along with our seminarians. So people who want to work in chaplaincy at a university or healthcare chaplaincy, prison ministry, military chaplaincy, all these different things that are professional and that you need to have professional accreditation for. We do those. We provide that program. It's the same one that the priests would take with us, or the seminarians rather. So that's one important thing. We do a Masters of Religious Education program. So this is mostly for your teachers in Catholic schools who want to go on to leadership, to be a principal, that sort of thing, or to teach religion more deeply. They take this master's program. And then another program that is particularly relevant to what we're talking about tonight is a new undergraduate program. It's a Bachelor of Arts in Catholic Studies, and the seminarians take this before they go on to do their theology. But it's open to lay students, anybody who's graduated high school, like yourself, as you move towards that. Might find this interesting. It's a unique program in the country. It just started in September, and it's unique because it's first of all, it has a great books curriculum, so a classical curriculum. So instead of going and reading textbooks where a modern scholar has summarized what St. Thomas said, the students will be reading St. Thomas's own writings or the writings of Plato or so forth. So I think that's interesting. If we read the original text of the tradition throughout history, from the ancient texts to contemporary ones. And then also our teaching style in this program is a bit different as well. So it's not like lectures where we just sit and talk and you take notes. It's all done in what's called a Socratic method. And Socratic method means question and answer, because Socrates was an ancient philosopher who developed his thought by asking questions. And so the professors lead the class by asking questions and getting your response and engaging with your thought and your ideas. And then the last part of this, I think that's interesting as well, particularly is in the first year. Part of this program is a sequence we call the Way of Beauty, which is to familiarize ourselves with the church's tradition of sacred arts. And so one part of the course is learning about the history of the arts and the church's role in writing, music, painting, and so forth. The other is a practical component where you actually do drawing and painting, learn how to paint an icon and things of this sort. And then the third part of it is sacred music. So learning how to sing in choir, Gregorian chant, and various other forms of liturgical music. So that's a new program that's developing. And then we have a certificate in Catholic Studies program, which is really short online courses for faith formation and understanding different aspects of our faith. These are usually about 8 weeks, and it's basically reading a book with some direction and then writing some reflections on what you've read. And we have about 90 different subjects, 90 different courses in that program right now. So those ones are particularly affordable and convenient. They're online and they're short, so anybody can do them.
Awesome. And right now, are you guys only online?
We're a bit of a mix. This new Bachelor of Arts program I was talking about is completely on campus. But this year, for the first year, it was all seminarians, because the program got approved just before the year started. And then with COVID as well, our space is very limited. But we're hoping to have a larger class next year with lay students as well. So that one's completely face-to-face. Most of our other programs are online. Those that have full-time students studying, we try to have a couple of courses where they can do in a socially distanced face-to-face, because it's hard to do a whole year's worth of study online without any direct contact is hard for people.
Yes, absolutely. As I think that many people already know. Hey?
Yeah.
I'm seeing some nodding heads. If one were to start somewhere, where would you say is best? Especially at most of them are high school age.
Yeah. Well, I think two or three places. One, G.K. Chesterton, who's a lovely writer and fun to read, has a book called The Dumb Ox about St. Thomas's life. And he gets a little bit of his thought in there too. So that's fun. In St. Thomas himself, I think the best one is to read to start is, it's very short. It's his commentary on the Apostles' Creed. And it was given as a homily, so it doesn't have the heavy technical language of some of his other stuff. But then also the Summa itself is online at New Advent, and I think just going through and read some of the titles of some of the articles, and then skip through the objections because they get technical, and just go to his answer. And a lot of them, probably 70%. You don't really need any technical background to get something out of, and also they're short. Like each answer to the article is less than a page, so it's not an onerous task. So if you go through, find a question that you're interested in, and see what he has to say about it, an easy way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, we had our last youth group was all about Chesterton, and they spoke a little bit about how Chesterton wrote a very accurate biography on St. Thomas Aquinas, which, yeah. So that's cool. Now I feel like everyone just has to read it because it's mentioned twice. That's a sign.